You guys have an appetite for some Ferrari content? Well, today is your day. We're going to be elbows deep in this Ferrari 355. Our goal? We need to separate the entire drivetrain from the body of the car. So you're probably wondering, why are we going to be separating the complete drivetrain from this car? Well, that's because we need to replace the timing belts. Yes, in order to replace the timing belts on a 355, the entire engine and drivetrain needs to be separated from the body. And what's even more wild than that is Ferrari specifies that this service needs to be done every 3 years. Yes, I'm saying every 3 years the engine needs to come out of your 355. Now, some people will say that you can actually replace the timing belts on a 355 with the engine in the car, and that is done via removing the fuel tank from the car and getting up and getting the timing belts replaced. Now, space is tight for that, and I'll show you in a little bit, and you can get the timing belts removed and reinstalled. However, I don't consider that being done the proper way because you do not have proper access and room to degree your camshafts in after your timing belt replacement, and in my opinion, anytime a Ferrari gets its timing belts replaced, the camshaft timing needs to be degreed and verified that it is correct. So in today's video, I'm going to walk you guys through all of the steps that we're going to take to get the complete drivetrain removed from this car in preparation for the timing belt replacement. My goal is to make this a very comprehensive step-by-step guide showing you all the steps, all the tricks, and all the things you need to get taken care of, disconnected, and removed in order to get the drivetrain out of the car. Now, our first order of business that I'm going to take care of in order to tackle this project, we need to get this rear bonnet off the car and out of the way. Now, it makes it a lot easier when you're working on the front of the engine up by the firewall because you can get your head up there and see. There's not a lot of space up there. We have multiple coolant hoses we need to deal with. We have the throttle cable, some power steering lines, and the wire harness, which is really a difficult aspect of this service on this car. Really nearly impossible to do with this bonnet on. In addition, if you guys saw my last video where we did the inspection of the car, I have a coolant leak coming from the front top side of the engine, and I don't have good enough access right now to see it. With this bonnet off, I'll be able to get my head up in there, identify the source of that coolant leak so that way we can get the proper parts on order to get that repaired. Now with the rear bonnet off, you can see why it's so much easier to take this off. Our access to the front of the engine for all of our connections is right there. We can lean over the quarter panel, get right into it. On top of that, with that thing out of the way, we have a lot better visibility, much more light in there. So definitely worth a couple minutes to take the 4 bolts off and get that out of the way. You'll also notice that I took the roof off of this car. So this car happens to be a GTS, which is essentially designates that it's a Targa. I did so because later on in the process, we need to run the wire harness from the ECU that stays with the engine through the firewall and the bulkhead back here. And it's back behind this cover. It's actually one of the more difficult aspects of this job. Well, I'll show you why. It kind of sucks. It's going to be a lot easier for me to manage that wire harness while I'm getting the engine out with the roof off, because you can see I have so much more access of getting in and out, because one of the downfalls of these cars is access on a lift. You have very, very little range of motion on opening your doors, and I don't want to lean over it and crawl in through the window. Roof off, it makes it much easier. Another thing that I did is I took an extra layer of protection underneath my fender covers. So you can see that there's a real thin layer of plastic that I put there. This is commonly used, mainly I'd say by auto body shops. They will use it to protect cars. They use it when cars come in that say there's a broken window and they can't roll it up. They use this plastic wrap to seal the car up while it's sitting outside. It's not super aggressive. It, moderately sticks onto the paint, won't damage the paint or any of the detail work. Now I'm doing that because I've noticed over the years from all the work that you do on the car, and you're right here and you're just slightly moving and just wiggling that fender cover back and forth, that it can really affect the detail of a car. Most of these cars that come in are detailed to the max. There's no swirls, no scratches. It's very, very nice paint. And even though that these fender covers are microfiber, it will kind of haze and dull the paint up, and I just don't like that. So to eliminate that from happening, I threw the plastic on there and the fender covers up over it. Not the ultimate solution, I will say. At the dealership that I worked at, we actually had hard molded fender covers that were custom fit to the back of these cars. They're essentially made out of a fiberglass material with a nice lining on the inside. Those things were absolutely outstanding. Provided great protection, dent protection, just really great option. Not in my cards right now, so that's my next best option. So before we just go gung-ho and start ripping stuff off this car and getting this engine out, I really need to dive in and get to the bottom of this coolant leak. There's clearly something that's failed and needs replacement and some attention. So with the location of the water pump, really my best chance of seeing what's going on is from the top side. Now, since we're doing the engine out anyways, I know that I'm going to be removing the power steering reservoir and the fuel lines for the service. So we're just going to remove those now, and that's going to give us access to the water pump and see the cause of this leak. Really, it's all mounted to each other. So the power steering reservoir is sitting on a bracket up here in between the two plenums, and attached to that is this aluminum fuel block with all of our fuel lines going to it for the fuel feed and return for both sides of the engine. Now, we will have the fuel system open during the entirety of this repair, and one thing that will catch you off guard is if you leave the fuel cap on the car. Usually that you'll take the car apart one day, leave the fuel cap on, you leave your fuel lines open, you come in the next day and you'll find all of your fuel on the floor of the car. With temperature differences, heating, contraction, it's quite often the fuel can get siphoned out of the fuel lines of the car and leak on the ground. So during the entirety of the service, I actually have the gas cap off the car, and that allows the tank to have a neutral state where it's not under any vacuum or pressure, and you'll prevent that problem from happening. So just a couple quick bolts, we'll get these fuel lines off, and then there's just two small hose clamps onto the reservoir, and this whole unit should lift right on out. Now, I also did take a Sharpie and made small marks on my fuel lines for the front and rear lines, so that way I have the pressure and return. I don't end up getting them crossed on reassembly. Now, I prefer to use Sharpie because once I'm done, I'll just come back with a little brake clean and wipe my marks off. No one will ever know. So with the fuel lines off the bracket, the only thing we have left is our power steering lines. We can slide that up, and just two hose clamps, and this whole unit should be out of our way. Alright. So you can see we got this whole unit out. I'm trying to plug the bottom so we don't leak any more fluid. But this is the aluminum fuel block that the fuel lines go onto, and you can see our entire bracket. One interesting thing to note is there's two versions of these mounting blocks for the fuel lines. There was a recall, I believe it was RC48. The block that came on these cars from the factory sits too low. It'll cause these fuel lines to rub on the hose clamps to the coolant lines, and it can cause the lines to rupture, even though they're braided AN lines, and obviously that could lead to a fire. So there's a new updated block that moves the fuel lines up higher and out of the way. This car actually is still running the original block, so it does have the open recall on it. So it's looking like at the end of the repairs, I'll be taking this car back to my old place of employment and getting the recall done. So that should be interesting. With our power steering and fuel line block out of the way, this is as good as our visibility gets. We have our thermostat and thermostat housing sitting right there. Now that is bolted onto the water pump body, which bolts to the front of the engine. However, it's a bit unique on Ferraris. The water pumps are a little insert that bolt in, and they're actually all rebuildable. You don't replace the entire water pump. You keep the housing and certain components. You put new seals, maybe a new impeller in. But the light's not great, but if you can see right down there where I'm pointing the screwdriver, that's our water pump body. So it's a little bit further down, and it's going to be hard to see if that is leaking. But we do have great access to our upper radiator hose here. We have our heater hose, and you can see the other radiator hose over here. So I'm going to pressure test this cooling system right here, and my objective is to see where it's leaking. Now I'll be able to verify that it's not leaking out of any of the hoses. If all these hoses are good, there's no leaks, then our culprit's going to be the water pump. I'll still see if I can get a mirror in there and confirm. I really want to get a good visual of where the leak's from before we go any further with this. All of this stuff has to come off to get the engine out, but before I disrupt it, I want to find this leak. I don't want to put this back together and have a leak on the tail end of the repairs. So I think now is the time to shoot some pressure in there and see if we can't find where this leak's at. There we go. And, ooh, right there. There's our leak right there. So that, very likely, there we go. Easy. Well, that's great news. Tightened up that hose clamp and no more leak. I will let that sit there for a little bit. We're going to check underneath on the ground to make sure that there's still no leaks. I'll give it a couple minutes, call it good, and that is great news because we're not looking at a water pump rebuild or any hoses. It was just one of those pesky little hose clamps. Okay, here's the status. It's been about 20 minutes and we're dry. You can see where I mopped the floor, but effectively there is no coolant leak, and if you remember beforehand, it was immediate and fairly significant. Immediately. Instantly. Just puking from right up at the front of the engine. So I'm quite positive, quite certain that that loose hose clamp was the only thing that was causing the leak, which is great news for the client because we don't need any further repairs. I am going to let the car continue to sit with the coolant pressure tester on it for a few more minutes to eliminate any ounce of doubt that we may have on that. And frankly, that's only because I need to start evacuating the AC from the car, so there's just no point in pulling that coolant pressure tester off. I'm going to pull out the AC, get that all out. Once I'm done, we'll confirm, yep, no leaks, exactly what I expect to see. And then I'll bring you guys back because that's when we're really going to get started on getting this engine removed. So, anytime I'm pulling an engine or drivetrain out of a car, my starting point is almost always the fluids. I like dropping the fluids from the get-go. I don't like putting it off. There's a couple reasons why. One, it gives it more time to drain, you get more of the fluids out. Mainly, it makes a huge mess, and I'd rather just get that out of the way to start with. And also another thing is it kind of interrupts the flow. Because once we go to drop the fluid, we have to sit here and let it drain, put our drain plugs back in, clean up our mess, and it always slowed me down. So it was always the first thing I went to, dropped all the fluids at once. And it's a little bit different because back here we actually have our radiators. You can see my drain is right here on this side, and I have another one on the other side. So we have two radiators we need to drain. We need to drain our engine oil, but it's not just draining it from the oil pan. This car is a dry sump, meaning we have to drain the sump and the oil pan. And on certain Ferraris, you actually have multiple drain plugs on the oil pans that you have to drain the oil out of. Fortunately for us, this car only has one. In addition, we're going to be replacing the gearbox oil because we're going to be addressing the leaks that we have on the gearbox. So we need to get the gearbox oil drained as well. The circle back to the dry sump. So our oil tank is sitting right up here, kind of on the side of the radiator. And my drain plug is right up here in between the frame rails. Now, anytime I'm changing the oil on a car, the dry sump, the first thing I drain is always the sump, never the engine. Now, the reason why I drain the sump and not the engine is really, I've had it to where you drain the engine first and you don't drain the sump, and depending on how quick you get the oil change from when you shut the car off, you can actually have the sump drain oil back into the oil pan. This is case in point. This car's been sitting here for quite a while. I haven't ran the engine, and I'm barely getting any oil out of my oil tank right now. Almost all my oil is sitting in the sump. So if I were to drain my engine sump first, put the drain plug back in, then drain my oil tank, I potentially am not getting all the oil out of the car, and a lot of that oil is going to flow back into the oil pan and not get changed. So to help avoid that, it's always the sump first, and I had just enough oil in here to cover my bottom of my pan. And from my flat rate days, I don't like sitting around waiting for oil to drain. So make use of multiple buckets, and believe it or not, buckets are great for this. Even when I was working in the dealership, buckets are the go-to to get oil drained because they're quick, they're easy, and I can run multiple of them. They're cheap, and I can get everything drained at once. So we're going to work around our oil tank that's dripping and get our oil pan drained, which is right up here at the front of the engine. And again, on this model, just one simple drain plug and get our oil out. So you can see that all of our oil was in the oil pan. So it all backflowed out of the sump into the engine. If I had this car where it was just running, where if the engine was running recently, the dry sump system would have sucked all that oil out of the engine and stored it in the tank. So the best way to ensure that all the oil comes out, tank first, and then do the sump, whether the engine's hot or cold. So I'm a big advocate of draining your oil while it's warm. It's more viscous. You can get more oil out of the car, and I feel that it's just a more thorough oil change. Now, unfortunately, this engine is cold because it sat for a week and a half since I did the compression test on it. And compression test, I had the spark plugs out, meaning I'm not going to put the spark plugs back in just to get the oil warm to do an oil change. I also have the benefit that all this work that I'm doing on the service is going to take me several weeks. So I'm going to drop the majority of the oil out of the car now, throw the drain plugs back in. I'll circle back in a couple weeks when I'm done with all the service work, pull the drain plugs one more time, and get what little oil is remaining out of the car, and we'll be able to get it all out with that aspect. So while we're waiting for that oil to just kind of drip out and drain, we're going to make an attempt at getting our radiator drain plug here out without making a gigantic mess. I'm probably going to get a face full of coolant here. Now, one thing that I did not mention is I do have the radiator cap off and the oil tank cap off, so that way everything's allowed to drain out and we're not putting the system under a vacuum by opening it up here on the bottom. So while we're letting that drain, we'll grab our other bucket, spin around, and you'll probably see why I like the bucket method now. You got so many things in this car to drain, it just makes it a lot easier and faster to get all the fluids out of the car rather than waiting on the same bucket. There we go. And last but not least, we'll get the gearbox oil dropped out. Now the fill plug for the gearbox is actually kind of tight and pretty buried. We're going to have amazing access to it once the engine's out of the car. So I did not pull that off, so there is a little bit of vacuum in the gearbox. You can maybe hear it kind of pulling it through the vent at the top. So it's going to give it, or it's going to take a few more extra minutes for this to drain out. On top of that, it's gear oil, it's thick, takes a bit to drain. So we're going to let that drain just like the rest. Once it's done, we'll put the drain plug back in. Same thing, we'll come back towards the end of repairs and give it one more drain. So we're not worried about a new crush washer right now. Once that's done, we're going to get the car back down, start working on the top side. So we got the fluids drained and we're ready to dive right on into this. First area we're going to start, we're going to get these air boxes out of the way, all the air boots. It's really going to open this up and help out with the wire harnesses and get everything disconnected back here. And really, to get these air boxes and air inlets off, really not that hard. Just a couple hose clamps here will loosen up. And I'll take them out in sections. So with everything loose, we'll be able to just work this boot out. And we'll move over to our air boxes. There we go. And they're just held on around the perimeter with a little 10 mil nut. Now, one thing that most people aren't accustomed to when they start servicing these cars is all of the hardware. For whatever reason, Ferrari is not a big fan of captured hardware, meaning captured washers onto the nuts. They like using nuts, regular washers, and lock washers on seemingly everything. Meaning, as I take off each one of these bolts, I need to come back and fish off 2 sets of washer per stud, so that way they don't fall off and I don't lose them. So you can see I just lifted the air box and got those 2 washers off, and they're on every stud. But it's not limited to the air box. It's basically every piece of hardware in this car is like that across almost all of the cars. It is definitely something that slows you down on the repairs. A little weird quirk of the brand. I have no idea why they do it, but they do. So dropping washers is a real problem, and I've found over the years it's easier just not to drop them. Take your time and take them off. rather than dropping them and spending a bunch of time looking for them. It's going to be pretty straightforward. Just pop those guys right on off. Now for the remainder of our air boot, we have our idle valve that we're going to have to contend with. There's also some wiring or a wire harness that's bolted on the bottom side, and our intake air temp sensors under there that we're going to need to disconnect. So we can pop our boots off, pop this off of the idle valve, and pop that out. That's going to give us some working space. Disconnect our intake air temp sensor, and now we can get to our wire harness. And zip that out of there. Now I'm taking the vacuum line off that goes to the valve for the exhaust bypass system. We need that removed in order to get this heat shield off, and that's really going to expose the entire muffler and the exhaust bypass system, which is a very cool thing we'll talk about here in a second. Just held on again, a couple nuts, and a bunch of washers. There we go, all exposed. So now with all that out, we have a clear shot at our exhaust bypass system and also all the wire harness connections we need to disconnect back here. I'm going to grab you guys, drop you in, and show you what I'm talking about. Alright, so we can see it loud and clear. Right here is our exhaust bypass system. That is not the main exhaust flow path. That is only the flow path when the car is under full throttle and this valve is opened. Very unique to the 355. Honestly, it's very unique to any car I've ever seen. Once we have the engine out, I'll show you the rest of the exhaust and how that path works out. But it's pretty clever, pretty neat, and honestly, that is one of the key factors that make these cars sound so beautiful and really helped them earn the reputation of being the best sounding naturally aspirated Ferrari that they've ever built. But we've really just removed the air boxes and the heat shield, and you can really see that it has opened up quite a bit. So we need to get all these connectors disconnected because half this wire harness is staying with the engine and the cradle, and the other half is staying with the body. Now getting all these connectors disconnected is pretty straightforward. The only ones we really need to worry about are for the O2 sensors, because we have our pre-cat and post-cat O2 sensor. The connectors are sitting right next to each other back there in the corner. You can see right over here. The problem is they're identical. We could swap those around and get the pre-cat O2 sensor plugged into the harness side on the body for the post-cat O2 sensor. We don't want that. Now I don't rely on the factory blue tape that you can see right down there. I take some tape and I just mark each end of the wire harness on one connector on either side. It doesn't really matter which, and then I disconnect them and I don't have to worry about it. But all the rest of the sensors and connectors that you see back here, they only go in one way, so you don't have to worry about that as much, and we can pop those off and disconnect them. And you'll see like this part of the harness here is going to stay with the engine subframe. All this cross bracing up here is coming out with the engine, so items that are attached to it are coming with it. A good example right here is the battery. You can see the battery cables come down and are attached to it, so those stay. This box stays with the body of the car, and so does this battery feed cable to it. So we will need to get in here and get these disconnected. We have some vacuum lines coming back here. This is for the secondary air pump. There's our vacuum supply line from the engine right here, you can see. Just pop those off, disconnect those, and down at the bottom we need to disconnect our cat ECU connectors. Again, same story with the O2 sensor connectors. We're going to label those because there's two ECUs down there, two connectors completely identical. We can mix those up, and we don't want to do that because then we would have the wrong thermocouple. You can see right here, reading into the wrong ECU. That could cause a check engine light or a slow down light. So a little bit of tape, takes a second. We'll get those marked up. And I'm going to work on getting all these connectors disconnected and everything freed up at the back of the car. All right. Oh, fail. We'll have to go back for that nut later. I heard it roll and hit the lift. The battery cables are off. One thing I didn't mention is I did disconnect the battery earlier. There is a battery disconnect up at the front of the car, so I turned that off, and we don't have to worry about any power supply issues. Before I really get into that wire harness, though, I'm going to take this air rail off right here for the secondary air system. It goes from our cutoff valve and up to our non-return valves onto the exhaust manifolds. We'll get that out of our way. And there is a small vacuum line that's attached to it that this rubber hose goes onto, so it has a small metal line on this metal hose here that runs side to side, meaning there's a vacuum line right back here that goes to our supply tank, and this is the other end of that. So you want to be sure that that's always connected as well. We can get it right. There we go. Okay, so now we can focus on our connectors. We're going to start on the right side. We're going to go for those 202 sensor wires, and we will just take our tape like I mentioned, and we're going for the O2 sensor that has the blue tape on it from the factory. And we'll just put a little piece of tape on there just to designate that that is the matching connector. And then on the other one, we don't need anything. Take that off. And here is our vacuum supply from the engine to the reservoir. That needs to get disconnected. And we need this pigtail right here. This O2 sensor feeds into the cat on the backside of the catalytic converter, which is coming out of the car. So we need to get that disconnected. And this P-clamp that's on the subframe, that's going to have to come off as well. We need to disconnect our exhaust gas probe from our CAT ECU and our CAT ECU connector. Get our EGT for the right-hand bank disconnected. And now we can pull this whole harness and just kind of tuck it down beneath the car out of our way. Now, much like our O2 sensors, there's two CAT ECUs in this back corner, so same thing. Connectors are identical, CAT ECUs are identical, so we can interchange those connectors, which we don't want to do. So another quick piece of tape is going to ensure that we get everything back where it belongs. And right there. And that has the entirety of our wiring on the right rear side. So we'll jump over here, do the same thing on the left side. Although we have a few extra connectors for the F1 system. But again, the ones you only really need to worry about are the O2 sensors on labeling. The rest of them, you can just disconnect them and forget about them. Get our green tape just so we know who is who. So the blue tape on the factory harness is designating the pre-CAT O2 sensors. But the thing is there's only tape on one side of the harness. There's no tape on the O2 sensor side of the harness. It's only the body side. So that does tell me part of the equation, but I could still interchange these because once you disconnect it, I have no way of knowing which O2 sensor is which. So again, I can't stress enough the fail-safe of the tape. And there we go. There's the left rear side of the harness. Got our connectors off, just like that. We also need to get our shock actuators disconnected. There is a quick little locking tab on these. Only the left side has the locking tab. The right side is missing, which is not unusual. These cars have the engines removed so many times. They've been disconnected, reconnected over the years, so sometimes those get lost. Not a big deal. Again, not unusual to see them missing. You can see pretty quickly we got it down to where it's looking like something's actually happening. Like I mentioned, the engine's not really that bad to get out of these. It looks much, much worse than it actually is. I still need to do a little work back here, mainly with the exhaust bypass pipe. I need to disconnect it from the exhaust manifolds and up here to the muffler. But I have a little bit of penetrating lube on the hardware soaking in right now, so we're going to give that a few minutes of soak and do its thing. So while we're waiting for that, shift up to the front. And there's a few things up here on the top side that we can disconnect as well. A lot of it's pretty straightforward and pretty simple. We have our vacuum hose to the brake booster here. We have a quick disconnect down on the bottom for our gas tank vent. And once we get those out of the way, it's going to really help me get these fuel lines out of my way. I keep moving them here. And really the heart of it up here is our coolant hoses and our power steering hoses. So there's our power steering hose down here. Now that one's pretty tricky and I have a special tool. So when I get to the point of disconnecting that, I'll bring you guys back and show you, because that can actually be a little bit of a pain to get off. Coolant hoses, fairly straightforward. We can get all these smaller vent hoses off and get this expansion tank out of the way. The upper radiator hose, pretty easy. We can pop that off. The heater hose that goes to the expansion tank, all those are pretty easy. What you can't see down there is the lower radiator hose. It's buried. Again, like our power steering hose, once I get to that point and get these easy hoses off, I'm going to show you a trick on that, because that hose actually comes out with the engine. If you try to get that hose out with the engine in the car, it's nearly impossible, because it's a really short hose and it's basically a 90 degree and you just can't get it on, and there's also virtually no room. So I'll show you what we do to get this engine out and get that hose out and not make that harder than it needs to be. And also, while we're over here, we have our vent lines for our dry sump that go into the plenum here, our breather lines. We need to take those off and disconnect those. And we need to undo the hardware that's up into this corner here. And there's one tucked under here where the oil tank is bolted to the body, because the oil tank is coming out with the engine. So I'm going to jump on the quick, easy, boring stuff. I'll bring you guys back for the harder stuff and we'll keep trucking away. Now up here for the front, I think I'll just start with this expansion tank and get that off and out of our way, and that will give us a lot more room and also some visibility, so that way you guys might have a better chance of seeing what's going on up here. There we go. That one fought me. Let's see if this front one fights me as much. I don't think it's going to. It's going to shoot right off. Now the coolant hose is on the bottom of the tank. One, go around to the other side, and we should be able to get this tank off, and that's going to open up the whole center of this engine significantly. There we go. Now with that off, you can see that we have really good access up there for the few coolant hoses and our throttle cable. But before we jump over to that section, let's take care of our lines on this side. Our vacuum line here for the brake booster. Get that popped off, and we can tuck that to the corner. And our vent line, the disconnect, that makes it nice and easy. Get that popped off. And get our fuel lines up out of the way. With that done, let's jump over to our crankcase vent lines. So if you guys watched the first video where I did the inspection on this car, I talked about setting the oil level, and it's a little bit unconventional, as in we set the oil level to the minimum mark when the car is running at idle with the oil warm. And most people think that you'd want to set it to the max mark, but on a dry sump on Ferrari, set it to the minimum mark. We do so that way there's a buffer with the room for the oil to expand, because if you set it to the full mark, really drive the car, you're on a track day, you put a lot of heat into it, a lot of heat in the oil, it's going to expand. And it can expand so much and foam up that the oil can get up into these vent lines and actually get sucked into the intake tract via these plenums. And it causes obviously a big mess. You don't want oil in your intake. Depending on the car and the configuration, it can suck oil through your airflow meters and get oil across the element. So just a bad situation overall. When I say to set the oil to the minimum mark, it's because of these hoses right here. You don't want any oil getting into these. You only want vapor running into the plenums. Alright, so we're going for the upper radiator hose, and this one's usually not too bad. Get it off of the thermostat housing first. And we can slide it off. And it's off. All right, I'm gonna drop you guys in here so you can see what we're working with. We got a much better view of everything right now, now that that upper hose is off. Now that we have the upper hose out of the way, I could really show you what we have going on. Right here, you can see we have our throttle cable, and that's pretty easy to get off. We have our linkage back here. If you open that up a little bit, do this one-handed, open that up, you can run that linkage out of the pulley and slide it forward. And there's a little opening there where we can work the cable out, like so. At this point, you have two options. You can take that E-clip off and try to slide the cable out through that bracket, but if you do so, you're going to have to take these two nuts off, and then you lose your adjustment. I'm going to opt to take that nut off and take the bracket off the thermostat housing, and at that point we can just move the throttle cable up out of our way and we are finished. This coolant hose right here goes to our crossover pipe. It stays. We're done with that, and we're not going to take it off all the way. We'll just leave it on. You can see, I hope you can see, underneath the throttle there's the other coolant hose. It's a little Z-shaped guy, zigzag. That one's pretty tight in there. The biggest thing that we have to do is get it disconnected from the engine and use a little pick tool and get it loose onto the neck. If I can reach the other end of it, I will take that off and try to get that hose off, but it's not the end of the world. I just need to get it disconnected from the engine. I don't necessarily need to get it out. And also, you should be able to see the lower hose there. Move this guy and get you a decent view. You can see that that thing is buried in there, and what you can't tell is how far the hard pipes go into that hose, where you don't have that much room to bend and flex that hose. So the key to that hose is we're going to disconnect it where it goes to the coolant pipe up to the car. We're going to make sure that that hose is loose around on there. I do loosen the hose clamp where it goes onto the water pump, and I also loosen that as well, so I make sure both ends are loose. And then once we separate the engine from the body, that hose will come off. And we have to remember on reassembly, that hose gets connected to the water pump first, and then we fish the other end up onto the coolant pipe once it's into the car. That one's a little bit tricky. And the other one I promised to tell you about is our power steering. So we have our hard union here with our flare fitting, and there's a soft rubber hose for the power steering with the hose clamp. Soft rubber hose is pretty easy, but you can see, hopefully, that that's coming out at a really weird angle. It's not a 90, it's not a 45. We have this wire harness that's right above it. You guys can see for reference how much space I have in here with my hand on the plenum. That one's pretty tricky and pretty tight, and the solution for that, where'd it go? There we go. And the solution for that is sacrificing a line wrench. So it's a 17 millimeter line wrench that I use there, and you can see the bend that I put on it. And with that bend, I can get this up in the firewall onto that fitting, and I can loosen the line. This is basically my 355 power steering hose tool. I'll get this set up on there, and I'll show you guys how it all fits. All right, there you go. I got the line wrench on. There's zero chance that I can get that line wrench on and that loose and hold a camera at the same time. I have to push the hard line down in order to get that on, and you can see that it's basically hitting my hard coolant pipe up here, so not a lot of space, but you make your own little line wrench, you're set. Now, this is pretty tight, so I would not try this with an open-end wrench. It is pretty important to use a line wrench because you're going to be reefing on that fitting quite a bit, plus it's really awkward in positioning, and you round that fitting and you're in for a bad day. That's the hard line that runs at the front of the car. That's just nothing I want to tempt myself with or even play with, so use a line wrench, don't use a box wrench. We'll see if we can't get this power steering line off. Ooh, that one was good. Broke free, and I can just spin it by hand. And once I get that hard line off, it should be pretty easy to get my wrench back off there, because I can just pull it right back towards me, and we're in the clear. So with that, the last obstacle back here at the power steering is going to be our return hose. But fortunately, these small hose clamp drivers, this is what, a 7 mil. These things are key on these cars. We have a lot of hoses and hose clamps, in really weird positions, and they just save so much time, so much easier than a screwdriver or even using a ratchet and a socket. They're just key. So this forward hose clamp on the small heater hose, it is pointed right at the throttle cable, and I don't think I'm going to get to that quite easily with the engine in the car, and it doesn't really seem that it's worth it. So I'm going to just connect only the rear one. I'll leave the front one on and we'll push the hose off. I'm now working on the lower radiator hose, and both of these clamps need to be loosened and come off. I'll come around to this other side. So I'm sure it's pretty obvious at this point that it would be nearly impossible to do this with the bonnet on, because I need this visibility to look straight down. Let's see what I got going on. So those hose clamps are loose, and a long hook tool, clutch. So we just need to loosen the hose onto the neck, so that way it slides off nice and easily. You want to be careful with these tools though, because we don't want to puncture the hose. I want to reuse these. I have to go to the other side again. Can we get it off? There we go. Heater hose is off and free. I'm going to position it so it doesn't get caught anything when the engine's coming out. And now the bottom part of the lower radiator hose, we get that loosened up. So we got our upper hose off, lower hose, power steering's disconnected, lower radiator hose. Really, I think we're set up here for the front of the engine. Move our fuel line back over. We got our oil tank loose. All of our vent lines off. I think we need to jump back, take care of the exhaust. So for the exhaust, we kind of have to deal with it in two aspects. We have the top side and the bottom side. Right now, for the top side, we need to get all of the mounting hardware for this exhaust bypass pipe out of the car. This is pretty easy. Where the valve is at, we can take that hardware. There's just the bolt on top and the bolt on bottom out. The ones that are a little bit trickier down here where they mount to the manifolds, and you can see that there's just one on top and one down there on the bottom. So it's pretty manageable. You can get in there and you're basically limited to the wrenches. You just got to wrench those off. Same thing on this other side. You don't have a lot of working room. You're not really going to get any power tools in there. That's really why I lubed up those bolts with some penetrating lube, to make sure it's going to be as easy as I can to get that hardware out. So I'll work on getting those out and getting this off. Now the reason why we're doing this, you can see this cross brace right there, and it runs right under this pipe. This pipe comes out with the engine. This cross brace is, well, it's part of the body of the car, and it stays with the car. So you can see that we cannot get that out because it's overlapping on it. Not to mention, we are going to leave the muffler in the car, so we need to get this exhaust disconnected. There's a few more connections to do on the bottom side, but for now, it's time to get this hardware out. All right, I'm going to do it the painful way and go for the easy ones first, and then I'll suffer through the harder ones. Battery's dead. The amount of time I'm going to spend on the top ones versus the ones to the exhaust headers, it's just not fair. I'll tell you what. There we go. And now we will let the suffering begin. Get in here and see how bad this hardware is. Not too bad. Well, the bottom one came out nice. Let's see how the top one is. Much less space. Come back this angle. It's loose enough. I can get enough of a bite where it's just spinning right off. Thank goodness. I might be able to get that by hand. Whew! That was much quicker than I was anticipating. Let's see if we're lucky twice. That one's in a bad position. So I'm going to loosen the bottom first, and hopefully that'll give me enough to twist the exhaust clamps or the flanges and reposition the upper bolt so it's much easier to get off. Get our hardware out. Spin it out of this side. There we go. And we might be able to sneak this bypass valve out right now. So close. There we go. Right out of there. So to finish up the work on the exhaust, we need to remove these clamps right here that connect the muffler to the catalytic converter. I already have this one off. It's right here, and it's essentially like a bolt-on V-band clamp. One thing to note on these, when you're reinstalling them, be very careful on how tight you get them. If you over-tighten them, it will fracture right there. Also, as you can see on this one right in that corner, if you over-tighten this bolt, it will fracture that flange there as well. Now this flange, if I take both these bolts off, will come off of the catalytic converter. The exhaust separates right there. That is replaceable separately. I did catch that on the inspection, and the customer is going to have me replace that with a new one. So just one thing to kind of keep an eye of when you're assembling the car, because it can crack. Now it may not do it right away, but you give it a couple heat cycles after you tighten it up, things expand, contract, and it will end up cracking on you. This other side is fine. So I'm going to jump on this flange, get it off, and then I'll spin you guys around to the wheel wells and show you what we have to address up there. All right, so for the wheel wells, it's not too bad. The first thing I'm going to address right here is our oil cooler lines that go to the oil tank and to the sump of the engine. I'm take care of those first because, well, they're going to be leaking some oil, and I want to minimize my mess and the time that I'm here waiting. So this oil line coming from the oil tank to the lower radiator, it is a 36 millimeter, so you need a pretty sizable wrench on that fitting. They're not overly tight, just large diameter fitting. And we'll pop that off first and let that drain before we address the other lines. There we go. Now on this line, you can leave it here and get the engine out, but I find it easier just to take these extra 10 mils up on the oil tank off and pop the entire line off and just have it out of our way. Just preference. It's sealed onto the small O-ring, and as you can see, it's going to take me just a second to actually get this off, and it's a lot easier to really work with everything in here when you're not wrestling that line around. And the added benefit is we can reseal it through oil. While that's draining, another thing we can take care of real quick is the sway bar. We don't need to remove it, but we do need to disconnect it. That's going to really help us shift everything around and get this subframe shifted around to get the engine dropped out. So, real easy. 2/13. Spin them off. That's essentially all we need to do on the sway bar. I can pop this bracket loose like so. Actually, we'll just take the bracket off and leave it as is. Now we have our wheel speed sensor up here. It is normally clipped into a bracket up top. I pulled it down to show you guys, but we need to get that disconnected, and that just hangs there and comes with the subframe. Now we have our other oil line we can take care of. This is a much bigger fitting. This one is a 46 millimeter, which you need the big honking wrench to get this guy. Now this one we could leave in because it goes to the oil tank, and the oil tank is coming out with the engine. However, it's a little awkward to take care of when the oil tank's out because it wants to move around quite a bit, and the oil tank has to come off for us to work on the engine, so we have to disconnect this anyways. So we'll just do it now. There we go. You guys probably won't be able to see this, but on the bottom of the oil tank, there's a mounting bracket where it sits on the pin on the subframe. On the side of that bracket, there's a ground strap. It's a little 8mm. I'm going to take this little wrench. Now that I have the oil line off, I can get in there pretty easily with my hand and just get that knocked free. You want to get that ground strap off. If you forget about it, you are going to rip that wire free and clear. It's kind of an obscure wire and in a weird location, so be sure you don't forget about that little guy. Now that I got the wire off, I can fish it out, and it's right here, zip tied up to the radiator harness. So that whole harness there stays in the car. Almost forgot, the upper oil line. As I say, other than this upper oil line, the only other thing that I think that we have to take care of up here is our brake line down here. But I'm probably just going to wait until our oil is done draining, so that way I can work under it and get the brake lines disconnected. I usually wait until nearly the end to disconnect the brake lines just for them to prevent the mess and the oil dripping. It's not too bad if you cap the lines off, but for whatever reason, it always seems to be the last thing I go for. Get this other hose. Making a mess. So, pretty simple on this side. Only thing we have left is the brake line, but we'll get that from the bottom once the oil's done draining. The other side, on the left side, we have a couple other things to contend with. We have our parking brake cable, which there is an important note that I'll show you guys on that. And we also have to deal with our F1 pump. But things like the sway bar, wheel speed sensor, they're all the same. Pretty much mirror image on the other side. I'm going to let this oil finish draining out, get everything cleaned up, then I'll move you guys over to the other side. So on the left side, the things we need to disconnect. One, wheel speed sensor, I've already taken care of that. The clamshell or the bracket for the rear sway bar, we need to get that off, and now we can see that the sway bar is loose and has the movement. That's all it moves. That's all the space we have. And the reason why I take those brackets off is because I need that movement to get the engine out. I've tried getting this engine out without loosening up the sway bar, and it ended up biting me where I ended up getting everything jammed up, and I was unable to get it out until I came back and loosened it. So it's a no-brainer, super easy to get that taken care of. We need to get our brakes disconnected over here. We have much more space to get that taken care of. And where things get a little bit different, we have our park brake cable, and there is a special note. I'll show you guys on that. We need to take care of our F1 pump. And down over here, at the very bottom, we need to get the AC lines off of our AC compressor. One thing to note on the AC lines, if I get you in there close, you can see there's two fittings on the compressor. That's where I take them off because I actually have much better access down here from the bottom to get to those fittings. However, if you carefully look, there's two more fittings up there closer to the firewall. I don't chase those down because it's just hard to get a wrench in there and fight those fittings. It's a lot easier to take them off at the AC compressor. So on the parking brake, there's really nothing too special on getting it apart. Just take the spring off and our two nuts here. Now this is the main adjustment point for the tension of the parking brake, and that's kind of what I wanted to talk about because this has bitten me in the past and I learned this lesson the hard way. I used to always just disconnect the parking brake right here. I'll show you. Take the nuts off. Slide that cable off, and then we can work the parking brake cable out of the subframe. There we go. And we can slide our cable out like that. Move it out of the way. So this is pretty much my operating standard. I would pop the e-brake out and I would actually just take this hardware off and leave the cable exactly like that. Until it really bit me in the ass. So this parking brake cable, it has one cable that runs to both rear drums and has your shoes. Where the cable goes into the drum, imagine it being like a flat bar with a rectangle cut out of it, and there's a hook which is the lever that expands and contracts the parking brake shoes that latches into that flat bar. Well, when you take all of the tension off this parking brake cable, if I am to push in on that cable, it will push that bar in. That hook can fall out. You'll never know. When you reassemble the car, you can hook this cable back up, readjust your parking brake. The handle is going to feel great. However, if you park the car on a hill, pull the parking brake and put it in neutral, it won't hold very well. Although the tension on your handle feels dead nuts on perfect. I chased my tail on a car trying to figure out why my parking brake wasn't right. In the end, that's how I found that problem. So now, anytime I take these parking brakes off, I don't want to have any extra tension, or not tension, I don't want any slack on the cable to push it in. So, zip ties to the rescue. And you can see here I have to double these guys up because I don't have one long enough. But a little bit of zip tie right there. And I'm not putting much tension on it, but I zip tie it just enough so that way I can't accidentally push that in. Because honestly, I don't want to be pulling the caliper and rotor off and reassembling the e-brakes inside the shoe. That's just going to cost me time. It's a lot easier to prevent the problem. So it's a little trick that I learned the hard way, hopefully saving you guys the trouble. Put a zip tie in your e-brake cable. The last thing we have to address is our F1 pump and valve block and assembly. Now, someone's already done us a favor and marked which connector color goes to each solenoid, but I did label them like I do on the rest just for good measure. It's quick and easy, and we need to get all of our connectors off. Now, there is a whole nother row of solenoids on the back side. We can't really reach them right now, so we'll address those once we get this whole unit loose. But we got this side off, and from the top side, should be able to get the main power wire to it. There we go. And that's going to free us up to this bolt right here, and there's also a bolt on the bottom. We need to take the bolt on the bottom off, loosen the bolt from the top, and that will allow us to get this out of the cradle that it's sitting in. And then we can address the connectors on the other side. Don't need to take that all the way off. And all right. Now that all the hardware is loose, we should just be able to slide this up and free it from its bracket. Like so. We're fighting a lot of hoses and lines. There we go. And we can see here they have it marked black, gray, blue again. So all those connectors match. The blue goes to the blue, the gray went to the gray, and the black was on top. So we can just disconnect those. We don't need to label them. And all we need to do is have our F1 unit just sit right over there on the suspension. So the best way I can do that is grab a zip tie or two, and I'll secure it to the coil spring right there, and we should be set. I'll just set this, that rest right there. There we go. And that's out of the way. All of our lines are free and clear. In all reality, an F1 car is actually easier than a stick shift car. On a stick shift car, we have a clutch line that we have to deal with, and we also have the shift rod linkage that runs through the subframe up into the front of the car. And that's a little bit more difficult to take out because your adjustment on reassembly, on getting it lined up just right, it takes a little bit more time to get that dialed in, versus this is 7 connectors and 3 bolts. F1 cars, they win on this. So that pretty much covers everything back here in the engine bay that we need to unhook, and disconnect, and remove in order to get the engine out. Now there is one more part. I kind of alluded to it earlier, and this is the worst part of the job. And that's the wire harness up here behind the passenger seat. I've already popped the cover off, and I got all the wire harness loose. And you can see This is the engine harness that comes out with the engine. Doesn't seem so bad, right? Well, the reality of this is the hole I have to run that through is right there, and it's about 1.5 inches by 2 inches. And the worst part of this is there's not enough space to feed the harness in right now. You can see I can't even push it back to get a head start on it. The hole that we have to run that harness through in the firewall is incredibly tight, but the entire gap, because it has to run in between the body and the fuel tank, there's just enough space to run that harness through. So that means that we have to progressively run that harness through as we're removing the engine from the car. We can't feed that harness through all at once and not worry about it and drop the engine. So just an extra element that we have to have our eyes on and keep watching. One thing I did notice on this car is the grommet is missing. There should be a rubber grommet that seals that up right there on that wire harness. I am hoping that that rubber grommet is pushed back and just not pulled forward. I hope it's not damaged, because I'm not sure what I'm going to do if that grommet is damaged. I won't know until I get this harness out. And once we get this engine all the way out, I will show you where that harness runs. It is really tight. It's not a great design. A lot of other manufacturers would just put a nice connector back here, pop that connector off, and it wouldn't be a problem at all. Not Ferrari. They did this. So now that we have that done, we're pretty much set. The engine's ready to drop out. The only thing we'll need to do is remove all the subframe bolts before we get the engine out. But before I do so, I need to figure something out to get the engine on. Okay, so now that we got the drivetrain ready to drop out of the car, you'll notice that I threw a car cover on the car. And well, that's because we need to shift gears, do a little bit of fab work, and I want to make sure that I keep the car clean while we're doing that. Now this drivetrain drops out of the bottom of the car, so we could just use jack stands, set this subframe onto those jack stands, and raise the car off of it. There's a couple problems with that though. One of them, if you guys notice, I have very low ceilings in my shop, just about 8 feet, so I'm very limited on how far I can raise the car up. Also, if I use jack stands and left the engine on that, I would be limited to working on the engine underneath the car, which with my ceilings being so low, that's not a great option. Another thing that I don't like about that is you don't have much adjustment or room to maneuver the engine and position it as you're getting it in and out of the car. It's not ideal. So my solution, we're going to build a cart to set the subframe on. It's going to allow us to get it off the car. It's going to solve our height issue, and it's going to allow me to maneuver it around the shop and put it wherever I want and have plenty of space to work on it. So the meat of this cart is going to be that 2-inch square tubing. It's 180 wall, and I think I bought about 113 inches of it. We'll get that cut down, and that will be the base structure of the cart. And I picked up some other metal that's going to allow me to make my adapters for the engine, some flat plate that will cut and weld up for the cradles that hold everything in place. And actually, this is scraps from the old engine plates in my jet boat project. That's going to work great to mount our casters to, and we have 4 swiveling and locking casters, which is going to be a great improvement over the cart that I'm used to using. Now I really enjoy building and fabricating things, and it certainly looks like I'll get my fill of that today. So let's go and see if we can get this thing cranked out. Yesterday I was able to get the cart all finished up and came out really nice. Nothing too elaborate or fancy. I did choose to make my pads where the subframe rests on it removable, and that's for flexibility down the road. So if I choose to use this or configure this for different purposes, I can just pop these out, buy different adapters, slide them in. And also, you know, someday if I get a shop that has adequate ceiling height and I want to raise this stand up so I can do this timing belt service on the engine standing up, basically the cart's set up where I can buy more of this 2-inch box. I can use these and sleeve in and extend these legs up and build another upper ring similar to this, and I have the cart at full working height. But I think with the way it is now, down low, it's going to actually work great where I'll be able to do all the work sitting down. So I actually think I might like this a little bit better. We will see how I like getting the cart on and the engine out so much lower to the ground versus having one that's about 3 feet up. Hard to say. I think this one's going to work. So our cart is ready to go. The engine is ready to drop. But before we get the cart under there and start working to get the engine and subframe out, there is a couple of the subframe bolts that we're going to want to remove ahead of time, and that's right up here at the front. So you can see that there's this front plate where it bolts into the front of the car, and it's hard to see, but you have 6 bolts in total, and you have a matching plate on the other side. When that cart's under here and this car's lowered down, it's really difficult to get to those bolts and get those out. So we're going to remove 4 of them and leave the easiest 2 in there. The cart sits about right here, so I'm probably going to leave this bolt and this bolt in. We'll take the top 3 out and this inner one out. We'll do the same on the other side, and then we'll start working to get the cart under the car, get the subframe sitting on it, and getting the rest of the hardware removed. Now before we drop the engine, I wanted to show you what kind of space we're working with under here. If you look, this is the front frame of the car in front of the engine. That's the harmonic balancer, and I have about a finger's width of distance to get up in there, and I really can't even get up in there. I mean, if I needed to replace the alternator belt or the AC belt, it would be pretty difficult down here from the bottom, especially since I have to put a belt tension gauge on there to measure the tension of the belt. It basically would be impossible to do that properly without removing the fuel tank. Once I have this engine out, I'll show you guys because we'll have much better visibility from the engine bay. But that's what I was saying at the beginning of the video, where some people say that you can do timing belts by removing the fuel tank, and then you can reach up over this brace and work on the front of the engine. But once you guys watch what I end up doing for the timing belts, you'll see that that's really not a good option, and anyone that's doing that more than likely is not degreeing the camshafts in. And if they are taking the fuel tank out, replacing the timing belts and degreeing your camshafts in my opinion, they're just doing it the really hard way. These engines aren't that bad to get out, and it's a lot easier to get them out and work with them on the ground. So that's enough of that. I'm going to work on getting those bolts out first and getting that cradle set up underneath the car so we can work on getting this thing dropped out. So close. Here we go. Got them all out. So we'll get our cart positioned underneath the car and get the car down close. We'll have to reposition this cart. Give it another check. Pretty spot on there. There we go. So the cart is in position. I'll drop the car down just a little bit, get a little bit of weight on it. Now, it's sitting on the front of the cart, but the back is just a little bit off of the subframe, and that's because the way I have the car racked, it's leaning a little bit forward. That's not a big deal. We'll just take our floor jack and just stuff our floor jack right up underneath of it, and we'll leave it right there until we get all the subframe bolts out. So the cart is under the car. We need to get the rest of our subframe bolts out. So now I'll take out the remaining 2 on each side at the front. I need to get these bolts up here removed. This comes out with the subframe. I have that bolt right there coming through. This is the car. This is the subframe that comes out. I do these bolts last. Those are the last ones I take out. So I'm going to take the front ones out, take these top ones out on the shock tower. I'll take this bottom one out over here that goes straight through. The reason why that's the last one I take out is because if there's any tension or weight on the car, as I take those out, it'll allow everything to separate. Versus on these ones, it'll pinch everything in and pinch the bolt in. So that's my order of operations. I'm going to set you guys down, knock the rest of these bolts back, and then it's time to separate these two. This. Here we go. They're all out. All right, so I popped the floor jack out and I bumped the car up just a little bit to get everything started, but there's a couple things I wanted to talk about and show you guys before we really get underway here. First of all, you'll notice I have a tie down strap, and it's bare minimum that I put on here. So the purpose of the strap is to pull the muffler back and rearward to give me some separation for our catalytic converters. You can see right there I have a nice little gap, but it is still very loose as I have a lot of movement in the muffler. I say that you want this loose because if you over tighten this, you'll end up cracking the bumper, so you want to be very careful when you're doing this. It doesn't take much to achieve what we need. Now, we kind of got to circle back when we were talking about this bypass pipe where I had to unbolt it and move it. If you notice, I was able to move it rearward quite a bit, and now it's no longer overlapping this brace. So this bypass pipe is going to stay with the engine sitting on the transmission, and we're going to raise the car, including this bar, up over it. So that was why we had to get that all unbolted. And also, you'll notice right here is where the subframe for the car ends, where I took that last bolt out. This right here is the subframe for the engine and transmission, which is coming out, and the sway bar is basically pinched in between. And that's right there why we had to take the sway bar clamps off. You need just a little bit of movement in order to get this to slip up and over the sway bar to get it off. Very, very small tolerance. Real annoying that you have to do it, but that's just how it works. It makes it a lot easier. So we got everything free and clear. You can see I bumped the car up a little bit. I have a little bit of separation. So now it's time for me to set you guys down so that way I can focus, make sure I have nothing connected still, nothing snagged, and I can slowly raise the car up while I feed that wire harness through the firewall and get these two separated. So we'll give this a little bit of a bump. And give everything a little bit of a check. Good there. And everything's looking good. All right. Harness isn't quite ready to come through yet, but our lower radiator hose came off. We've gotten over the sway bar, so we're good there. Our oil tank, we're free and clear on that one. Got everything's looking pretty good so far. Everything clear over here. Keep going up. Getting close to the harness. Still got a ways to go, but I think other than our wire harness going through our firewall, I think we're free and clear everywhere else. We're gonna have to cheat here and work this wire harness through. There we go. It'll pull. Oh, thank goodness. Our grommet is still on the wire harness. It just wasn't installed all the way, so that's good. We'll fix that on reassembly. All right, we'll feed the wire harness through on the front side some more. Whew. All right. Got that. 2 connectors through. I got some slack back here, so we're looking pretty good on the harness. Oh, I just pulled about 6 inches through. That's really going to help us. Connectors. I actually might be pretty lucky here. There we go. There we go. Whew. So I got the whole harness through and the main connector sitting on top of the fuel tank. So that is really the worst part of it. And we got it pulled all the way through back here now. Excellent. Yeah, we're golden. Let's see how the balance of the car is. The car is a little front heavy. So we'll get a strap around the car to the lift just for some insurance. All right, we got our safety strap on. And we, I think, are officially free and clear. And there you have it. That's how you remove the drivetrain from a 355. Get this sucker out of the way. Well, we got some working room in there now. You can see with the drivetrain out that it leaves almost nothing at the back of the car. I mean, essentially is what we have is we have a little bit of structure and framework back here that holds all the body panels on, and that's it. I mean, the muffler's sitting there hanging on that, and there's, what, a couple of our CAT ECUs, secondary air pump in that corner, our charcoal canister over there. That's pretty much it. We have our radiators on either side, and on the right side it's also doubled up with an oil cooler, and behind that heat shield is our fuel tank. Now, with the engine out, we have really good access and views of where our coolant hoses went. You can see the lower hose connection right there where it's really tight. This other lower heater hose that I just left on, these are the ones where the engine sits about up to here, and it's real tight to get down there and work on those, and you can tell that they're real short, not a lot of working space, but it's manageable. And you'll notice the lower hose we left on the engine right there. So you can see that there's not a lot here to this hose, and you can't push it down and get it out and get it off that neck and clear of that neck. So you just leave it on there to remove the engine, and on reassembly, we're gonna set it on there loose just like this. And as we slide the engine in, we're gonna slide this hose on and not have to fight it. The other thing you can see right now loud and clear is our wire harness. Now, you did hear me mention a sigh of relief that this grommet was pushed back, so it was actually all pushed way back towards the back and not through the firewall. It is a little tricky to get that grommet back in when you install the harness. It's kind of a pain, but that's the right way to do it, so we will correct that when we're reassembling the car. But you can see this whole length of harness that we have to feed out through the hole, and now that we have everything out, I can really drop you guys in and show you that's the hole we have to run it through right there. You can see that small opening right across the gas tank, and it's so tight and that harness is so stiff you can't really feed it through all at once. You have to slowly inch it out, and another level of difficulty on getting these engines out. But honestly, with my lower stand that I used, it kept the car much lower, where it was a lot easier for me to run the lift. I had the benefit that I have a GTS, and I was able to work that harness out. It actually worked out pretty good. It wasn't really bad. The other engine stands that hold the engines up quite a bit higher, you can't really crawl in and out of the car. You have to commit somebody to basically just be in the car to run the harness through. So for a one-man band, this one worked much better. But drivetrain's out, so we got a clear view of the oil tank, and it's just sitting on there right now. It's pretty loose, so that's why we took care of that lower hose when it was in the car and secure. We have one more hose over here we'll need to disconnect, and then this tank will be free of the engine. But we have an outstanding view of the entire drivetrain. So we have our engine, our transmission is actually transverse, and then you can see at the very back, really loud and clear, we have our bell housing, which has our clutch and flywheel in here. You can even see that the starter's right here sitting backwards on the back of the engine, so a bit unconventional. Another good thing we have a good view of, our exhaust bypass system. We dart you down right in there. You can see that's our exhaust header coming off the engine, and it comes right into a Y right there. The lower path is the conventional path, which runs down in through our catalytic converters and in through the muffler. This upper path, where it Ys, it comes into this exhaust bypass. It merges with both banks, so it's essentially an X pipe. There's the valve right here that controls it that we removed from the top side and then into the muffler. This is open under high load and full throttle applications, high RPM. And essentially, it does two things. It's bypassing these big factory catalytic converters, and it's given us the benefit of the X pipe, which gives us a little bit more power, but really has a big effect on the sound of the car. Now, I find this system very cool. The hot rodder in me loves it. It's rebellious. It's kind of sticking it to the EPA because we have our exhaust flowing through, and when we're, putting around and performance isn't that important, who cares? Run it through the cats. When we want the power, we're bypassing the cats, running it through. It sounds better. We get more power, and it's factory. I love the system. I think it's hilarious, but it also just makes this car sound absolutely amazing. The only way I figure they can get away with it is there is small catalytic converters right here in this pipe, so theoretically it still has cats when it's running through the bypass pipe, but we can all tell those things are pretty small. They're not doing a lot of good. Very interesting system, very, very unique and specific to the Ferrari F355. Okay, so now that we have all of the access to show you both the front of the engine and the engine bay, now is the perfect time to discuss a little deeper the concept of doing timing belts with an engine in a car on a 355. Now, you can clearly see that silver heat shield, so we would pop that off once the fuel tank is removed. So let's say we're doing timing belts with the engine in the car. We have to drop the fuel tank, remove that silver heat shield, and you can kind of see the footprint. We have, you know, maybe 2.5 feet by a foot of space that we're going to have to work in, and that gap where the fuel tank is up and over that black cross brace. Now that will give us access to get up in here and work on our belts and get a belt tension gauge, make sure these are tensioned, get our plastic covers off for our timing belts, get our timing belts off, and yes, that can be done because we'd be basically looking about having an access like this once the gas tank is removed. Now the reason why I say it's not a proper repair, because in order to degree the camshafts in, which you, in my opinion you have to, anytime you remove a timing belt, heck, anytime you change the belt tension, your cam timing will change a little. In order to re-time the engine, I need to remove both valve covers. You can do that with them in the car, but by the time you get the valve covers off, and then we have to set up multiple dial gauges on the camshafts and in the spark plug hole, it gets really crowded. On top of it, the cam timing, to get a degree wheel on the engine, to read the numbers, to read your instrumentation that you have on the valves, it's just not happening. It's very, very difficult, and as you guys saw, it was not that difficult to get this engine out of the car. For example, here is the parts that I removed to get the engine out. That's it. So we got a couple oil hoses, our air filtration, our air inlet tubes, expansion tank, and a small pile of hardware. And that's it. The whole drivetrain comes out. It really is not that much work. So if you guys are looking around, you're asking people about getting timing belts done on your 355, look into it, educate yourselves, and find out which method they're doing. Are they degreeing the camshafts? Because some people will even drop the engine out like this, pull these covers, leave the cam gears on the engine, install new timing belts, maybe new tensioners, put it all back together. And again, they still never verified the cam timing. I have seen, and I'll show you when we're doing the cam belts on this, the belt tension will change your camshaft degreeing. It's not a lot, maybe a degree, half a degree, but it changes it. And we can dial it in to be perfect. So you just want to know what you're getting. There's nothing, I would say, wrong with just doing belts and not going in and degreeing the camshafts. I would say it's less than optimal. I'm only saying that if that's the route somebody's taking, be sure that you're paying a discounted price. Don't be paying full price for belt service if they're not doing the full job, essentially. So ask the people what they're doing and be sure that what you're paying for is what you're getting. Well, there you guys have it. You are now armed with the knowledge on how to remove the drivetrain from a Ferrari F355. Now, what's next for me? We're going to be addressing the timing belts, our camshaft timing. There's also some tricks to show you on how to prevent the valve cover gaskets from sliding out. We're going to do some tricks to prevent some future oil leaks on the engine. And we're going to go in great detail on the camshaft timing, explaining the process, the procedure, because it is wildly different on this engine versus what we're accustomed to, say, on domestic V8s. So I want to hear what you guys thought of this video. Jump in the comments, let me know. Be sure to give the video a like, share it with your buddy. And as always, guys, thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one.